Welcome to the final and the fifth episode on social science elements in cybersecurity. And to have this conversation, I have with me Donovan Cheah, cybersecurity professional based out of Singapore. And those of you who missed the previous episodes, please make time to listen. There's much for you to take away from those conversations. And today, the topic is cyber-mediated communication. I'm going to let Donovan share his thoughts on this. What is cyber-mediated communication?
My gosh, thanks Sujit for putting me on the spot now. So we in this series, right? Sujit started by explaining a lot more, and now he's finally ended off by asking me to explain the whole topic. My gosh, I will just maybe interpret the topic quite literally because it's probably the first way people interpret such topics. To be honest, if you try to search for this term online, you probably won't find very much because people normally don't present this topic a certain way. But once I explain it, it is quite clear what it means. So if you just break this down quite literally, cyber-mediated communication just simply means how we converse through cyberspace, right? And what do we mean here? Cyberspace here is not cybersecurity mediated communication, just to clarify, right? Okay, what we're really saying is this: how do people communicate online? How do people present themselves online, right? And then there comes some security and privacy implications, right? Do our online behaviors actually have certain implications? Answer, of course, is yes. Otherwise, we won't have this episode. But what might these be? So, I mean, let's give a very silly example, right? Let's go back to the good old days where Facebook first came up. So people literally took Facebook like their life diary. Okay. So they were posting every darn thing, like, oh, they had a birthday, they had this gathering, they had that, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I myself, when I was much younger, I think I was, maybe in middle school or something, where Facebook came to the forefront. I think so. I can't remember offhand, but never mind. The main point was that there's this cool thing, and then we wanted to show we were cool kids, right? So we were basically sharing all sorts of stuff. Now, of course, when we were sharing all sorts of stuff, we were very thrilled because it's like, yeah, we're the cool kid who shares about all the coolest things we did in our lives. And then, many years later, we go, maybe you shouldn't do this because people can take advantage of the information you put out there because maybe this is private information, right? So the conversation has shifted because, quite simply put, the social context has changed, right? People realize that, hey, we can weaponize people's personal information. We can weaponize people's digital footprint, right? Oh, and hey, in the worst case, right? Sometimes you may even upload material that can utterly compromise you. I'll give you a very common example. If this still happens nowadays, and I don't understand why, but this still happens. So there are many people, especially in where I live, Singapore. Singapore's an island, so people love to travel because at some point you have island sickness or something whereby you get sick and tired of your island, you just want to get out of the country for a little bit. Okay. Now, what do you do if you are traveling? Well, you like to showcase your travels. That's fine. And so there'll always be some guy who will decide that it's a great idea to take a photo of their boarding pass. Now, quickly you see the problem, right? Because now if it takes a picture of their boarding pass on the outbound flight, and if it takes a certain part of the boarding pass, then you are able to basically access the entire itinerary and pretty much do anything you want. So you can basically steal the guy's personal information because there's copious amounts of personal information in the itinerary, right? Personal data, passport number, etc., right? All the people on the itinerary, even in some cases. Very bad. But it could get worse. It could get worse because I can decide to make this guy stranded in the other country by simply canceling his return ticket. That would be really, really evil, right? But fact is, people don't really think before they post, and that's a problem, right? So it all goes back down to some level of awareness, right? How we ensure that when we communicate using cyberspace means we do it properly, we do it in a way that we don't endanger ourselves. So that is my own take on cyber-mediated communication, and I took 5 minutes to explain the term. Don't ask me to write the dictionary.
I will not. What went through my mind when you talked about the boarding pass example?
Yes.
Let's say somebody from Singapore decides to fly to, let's say, Sydney.
Sydney.
We're talking about 3-4 hours of flying time.
No, longer than that.
Longer
Sydney
than
is
that,
about 7 to 8 hours.
7 to 8 hours, right?
Yes.
Now let's create a scenario.
Mm.
You know that this person is now outbound.
Yes.
He's going to be in the air, not
Yes.
reachable for that duration of the time.
Yes.
Somebody can create a duplicate or a fake identity of that individual, right? Now, using that identity, they can go and get a SIM reassigned to them, saying that, that SIM is not working, and get a new SIM issued, the same
Yes.
number.
Yes.
Now, when they actually target the internet banking account, the authentication codes come to this person, and they can
Yes.
now successfully exfiltrate the funds.
Exactly.
And I'm aware there is a documented case of similar nature in a different country where this person was airborne and did not know until he landed at the destination that his bank account was wiped off. Right now, I'm in Singapore. It may not happen because there's a very strong process in terms of establishing the identity and change of all these details. But there could be other countries which may not have a robust process for digital identity. So my point here is, when you talk about cyber-mediated communication,
Yes.
there are few elements come into play. One is an identity. You talk about a communication platform, and you talked about the context, which probably is the social context which you explain. And these three, when it comes together,
Yes.
you have a scenario which actually start to unfold. And most often, it would lead to a breach or impact that particular individual in some ways.
Yep.
Right? So my follow-up question for you is, how do you see taking into consideration the identity, a communication platform, and a context? What does the future hold for us? Does it look good?
Wow, the word good here is a very subjective word, right? Because what does good here mean? But I guess I will not, I'll spare everyone the pedantry here. Let's just use the layman view of this. I think, if you ask me, I don't see it as a good or bad thing. It just means we will change our behaviors as and when, as if we see more such attacks, right? Thankfully, I use the word thankfully here, and I hope this doesn't really happen. But as with all cybersecurity predictions, they tend to be more pessimistic, right? I hope that these attacks remain fairly exotic and fairly rare, as they come to the forefront. Countries introduce regulations that, hey, if you want to claim, you want to reissue SIM cards with certain mobile number, then you need to provide, then you need to have a lag time or something. Or when it comes to, say, proof of identity, then make the proof of identity much harder to clone. I mean, in Singapore, right? We can use digital identity, and we actually use our digital identity to basically do pretty much anything. And now stealing this digital identity is probably much harder than the physical variant. But we haven't gone so far as to abolish all forms of physical identity. But this also comes back to a certain episode that we did. I think it was the second one, where we talk about culture.
Yep.
And I
Second
think
one, culture.
correct,
Yes.
right. And I think it's easier said than done also, because once you start advocating more secure means of identification, the next question then comes, can all people change? Right? Because I myself, when I don't do just cybersecurity, I also do interact with people in my own line of volunteer work, and then I meet old people. And when I meet old people, what they tell me? They tell me they struggle with things like making sure they are fast enough to key in the 2FA code. So now, if I tell these old people to then say, every time you need to show proof of identity, you need to, use some app to do it, or say, okay, I mean, South Korea, some years ago, they wanted to build a blockchain-based digital identity. That's what they said. I actually don't know how that one turned out. Because at that time, it sounded cool because the word blockchain was everywhere. But now I heard nothing, so I have no clue. But coming back to this, can you imagine getting an old person struggling with their identity, pun intended in this case, right? In this case, simply because they had no way to show that they are who they are because they can't key in their 2FA code. So you see, it's not so simple. We know there is a technical solution to this. We know that it's probably more secure than the physical one because now, you can't just clone a card, right, and show, hey, this is my ID, right? But you see where the complications lie. Having said that, a very easy defense, which is much lower cost, is simply to do something called a delay grab. You don't need to post this live.
Yep.
Right? That is the cheaper way out. Until we get people who are, I guess, faster with their fingers. You see, this is not even this is always a young versus old thing.
Correct. And then especially when societies are aging, right? These problems are definitely to surface, right? And in Singapore's case, that might be very obvious. And I'm sure it would be there in other countries because they have not yet digitized the identity. So they may not be seeing this as an issue. But would you say that the best way to secure is to take an identity-centric approach?
In some sense, I mean, this is actually quite a complex question, right? Because then the question goes, if the digital identity database gets breached, what's your fallback?
Yep.
So what happens? What's the natural answer? There's probably some physical fallback. So can you clone the physical fallback? Yeah, you can clone the physical fallback. So what do you tell the SIM card guy? Oh, you told the SIM card guy, oh, my digital identity is locked out or something. I can't access it. I keyed the wrong password too many times. So here's my physical backup. Same problem happens all over again, right? So I think here you see that, hey, it is a good idea. It will help make it less likely that something will happen. But trust me, attackers always find very creative ways to work around these things. So in that sense, it's helpful. But I will never guarantee anything. As a good security practitioner would always say, nothing is ever risk-free.
So what my takeaway would be is to you continuously assess your response.
Yes, correct.
Right. What was good yesterday may not be good today.
Yep.
Right. What we may think is good tomorrow, we'd have to still assess the risk tomorrow and assume whether that is good or bad.
Yep. Exactly that.
So Donovan, just before I let you go, digital platforms are here to stay.
Yes, they are.
Right? So, and I guess Singapore is one of the early adopters of digitization or digital transformation. So every service is digitized. And I personally experienced, right, from your local commute to dealing with the government agencies to the banks, or even, you go to a eating place, right? So everything is digital and touchless, right? So the platforms are here to stay. What would be your suggestion for those economies which are thinking of digitizing? What should they be considering? Is it a one-step approach or multi-step approach? Should they look at identity as well as workload security? What would you suggest? I know it's a pretty broad question, but just want you to just share your 2 cents.
This is a huge question, right?
It is.
I would simply say this, right, as a very short answer, and I'll explain very, very briefly why. The short answer is that every country will have to find for itself, for herself, what their balance is, and for good reason. I mean, there are countries that are actually more digitized than Singapore, right? If you talk about the Chinese today, you are on WeChat. WeChat can be used to chat. It can be used to join communities. They have video ecosystem. You can pay with it too because it's a wallet, right?
Mm.
And the Chinese have kind of got used to this. They pretty much do this all the time, right? Because to them it's a way of life. So now the catch is always this: how do you make sure that whatever digitalization journey that a country undergoes, that her citizens can come on board and say, "Hey, this is something that we are somewhat comfortable with." And I say somewhat comfortable is because there always be change way we do things. Like I give you an example back in Singapore, right? I mean, we all used to use notes and stuff like that, but today I go out with a wallet whereby I have almost no cash in my wallet anymore, because I either pay by card or I pay by scanning QR codes, right? Change in lifestyle. Will the old people respond better or worse to this change? The answer is usually worse because, for one, a bit more conservative. Two, I think there's also symbolic value attachment to physical cash, right? So
Absolutely.
that is also important to consider. Once again, that's why we even do the series in the first place, because we now need to think about the user. The user experience comes in very important here, right? Because there have been digitalization journeys that were not good, right? When we ended up realizing that, hey, the users didn't like this, they didn't like that. It looked very great from an advertising perspective, but it wasn't useful. So then countries here have to figure out their user base and how to understand the social context before they actually embark on a digitalization journey.
I have these takeaways
Yeah.
for everyone who is listening to us or watching us. So, in order to ensure the way forward for a cyber mediated communication, or to build a society which is dependent on cyber mediated communication, we need to understand the human behavior, number one. The second one, they also need to pay attention to the cultural and political impacts, local, international. And the third one is how a community can be manipulated by the bad actors. And of course, pay attention to the social engineering element as well. So, anyone who is thinking of transforming a society, they have to pay attention to detail for all these topics which we discussed. Only then we can ensure, while we talk about science from a progressive perspective, the social science elements would pave way for positive impact in our society, and especially from a cybersecurity perspective.
Yep.
Donovan, it's been wonderful talking to you, but I'm just going to take a pause for you to say if you have any closing thoughts.
I think the most important sentence to say, right, goes back to first episode where we talk about cybersecurity being about people, process, and technology. We need to focus on people. And the reason why we must focus on people is quite simply put because people are at the heart of everything we do. And technology serves people. And so when it comes to securing something, when it comes to whatever digitalization journey we're talking about, we must always consider the person. How will the person use it, abuse it, respond to situations where he or she might not like the interface, the technology, etc. So it's really, really important to think about uh, the people aspect, and that's why the social science elements come in useful.
Absolutely. And when you emphasize on the people, I would always say have abuse use cases and also make the senior people in the society part of the testing and adoption process,
Correct.
because they will be able to tell you, or probably experimenting with them, you'll be able to identify where you really need to focus. Otherwise, what works for a young person may not work for a senior or a aged person. And
Yeah.
especially when the society ages over a period of time, all what worked well when the nation is young may fall apart at the time when the country or society ages. So, with that note, Donovan, thank you once again for sharing all your insights and experience. I enjoyed talking to you. A lot of takeaways for me. It refreshed my thoughts, and I'm sure viewers, you would also gain insights from this conversation. So, as I always say, hit the subscribe button, follow us, and also keep sending your thoughts to us. If you have any specific topics which you would like Donovan and me to talk about, please send us a note and we would be more than happy to oblige.
Yeah,
Thank
at
you so
this rate,
much.
maybe we will have new episodes. I may have to talk about all sorts of different things under the sun with you, Sujit. So thank you very much for hosting me through this series. I enjoyed myself tremendously, I must say.
See you around in another new topic. Thank you.